Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. In a recent article about our class president, Ambassador Roger Dean Carstens, Vanity Fair called 86 a fabled class. The definition of a fable is a short story using animals as characters to make a cautionary point. We are the only class in West Point history to be so artfully insulted. If you were in the right circles, my guest today needs no introduction. Robert L. Bullard, Lieutenant Colonel Retired, is an esteemed member of the class, and we'll hear all about him in today's podcast. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any government organization, particularly Department H. Now to the interview. Bobby, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start with the very basics. Your column number. Column number is 42995, 1986, of course. How do you feel about that column number? Do you feel like it's a good one, or you got any complaints with the Academy for it?
Yeah, I think the number resonates well with me. The first thing, Paul, is thankfully during our class, it was alphabetically. So It doesn't have any indication of my academic knowledge.
All these years, I thought it was about merit. And so I was always angry at you at some level that you were ahead of me, because I'm in the 43. You're saying it's alphabetical?
I think in 79 is when they went off the order of merit and started going into alphabetical order of precedence.
Well, that's why we have this podcast, Bobby. It's a lifetime of continuous learning, and we're here to learn new things. So I'm like 43 300s. You're 42 995. You know, the old saw goes that the long gray line of us stretches through the years of a century told, and it implies that we'll actually be marching into eternity. And I always thought, gee, Bobby's going to be ahead of me. So at least they got somebody up in first class to keep me informed of what's going on, you know, on the.
Now,
on
having said that, though, to have a column number is a privilege, and I feel blessed by it. So, yeah, regardless of the number. We're in the same number. We have a column number from the same class, and that's a big bond for me.
That's right. For those family members who are listening who don't know what a column number is, there was a brigadier general named Cullum from back in the 1800s. He created a thing called a column number, so every graduate gets his number, basically. Bobby's 42995. Talk a little bit about where life is taking you now and what you're up to.
Yeah, you know, I'm getting ready to make that wonderful transition. I hope it happens the way I planned it out. Nothing always happens as you plan, but I'm getting closer, hopefully nearing retirement. But I'm doing three major things in my life with respect to work-life balance. I work as an enterprise architect for a defense contractor out of a project in Fort Belvoir. Love the job. I just started that in April of last year, so I just completed my first year. Love the people, love the work we're doing. It's terrific. I'm also a small disadvantaged, disabled, veteran-owned business owner. Haven't been doing anything with that since COVID, but I still have that on the books in the event somebody wants to do work with me or something pops up. Always got to keep that option.
There you go. So I know about disabled and disadvantaged veterans, but I didn't know there was a category for small veterans, and I appreciate the fact that as a small veteran, you're good to go. So. Exactly. I always knew you that way. So now you live in the beautiful Virginia coast. I've had a chance to visit you out there, and I have to say some of the most beautiful country I have had a chance to visit. So talk a little bit about your setup out there, because you do have a bit of a setup, Bobby. Let's be honest.
It's a great setup. It's in Heathville, Heathville, Virginia. It's if you were to go to Fredericksburg and go due south, southeast. You'll hit the town of Heathville eventually. It's right on the Potomac River where the Potomac and the Chesapeake Bay meet. In fact, I could turn the camera, but it'll probably mess up the lighting. I got a great view of Point Lookout, Maryland. People want to look at that geographically. But it resonated with me because back in the early era when I was living in Springfield, Virginia, I learned of this place. And growing up in St. Petersburg, Florida, I wanted to be by the water. And this became an opportunity that I just couldn't pass.
You've been a water man your whole life, right? Right on. So
exactly.
Three bodies of water all converge where you're at. And of course you have a boat, so you can take that boat out. And how do you know which body of water you're in? You just kind of make a guess at it, or do they have a little sign out there that says this way to the chest?
Luckily, GPS does wonderful things. There is no sign, but the minute you cross the land behind me right here, which is about 300 meters, you're already in Maryland. So the Maryland border is on this side of the western side of the Potomac River.
That leads to St. Pete. So you grew up in Florida. Talk a little bit about growing up.
Yeah, I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, but I was born in Panama. Mom's Panamanian. Left to go to St. Petersburg, Florida when my dad was getting out of Vietnam. That was back in 1969, and that's where I picked up the prowess of fishing. My dad would come back from I'd come back from school. My dad just said, "Go pack up the car." And I said, "Dad, I got homework." This is middle school time. He goes, "Don't worry about your homework. Let's just go fishing." So that's when my passion for fishing just exploded.
It also explains where your study habits come from, because we roomed together, so I remember. So, perfect. You know,
right.
Apples falling from trees. So talk a little about that. So your dad's from Oklahoma. I remember the stories, and your mom's from Panama. So they met. How did they meet?
Yeah. So my dad was getting out of Korea. He was a Korean veteran as well. And he was assigned to Fort Clayton, Panama. And there he met my mom, fell in love. Then he ended up marrying her, and then he got assigned back to the States. And then he came back, yada, yada, yada. They married in like 56. Mm-hmm. And then my sister and brother were born in 58 and 59 in Yuma, Arizona. And then he got assigned back to Panama, where me and my other brother were born.
Awesome. But you spent most of your childhood in Florida, as you were saying.
Yes.
Okay. West Point, the military. Obviously, your dad was a veteran, Korea, Vietnam, and it was all around you. How did you balance not wanting to be like your dad and be like your dad? How did that whole come together for you?
How do I want to say? Yeah, I mean, my dad was my hero. I wanted to be in the military because of him. My grandfather is a World War I veteran too, so to me, it was like the natural progression. It was like Bullard, Army, why not? When my brother, 2 years older than I, was applying for West Point, I started reading the little pamphlets that he was getting, and I was like, well, if I'm going to go in the Army, it'd be really, really good if I could go in as an officer, and I get I get an education, I get a bachelor's degree. So this seems like the thing that matters the most for me. This is a pretty good fit. So thankfully, my brother is the one who kind of introduced to me the concept or the idea of getting to the military academy.
I remember back then they had that one magazine that we all saw. It was the exact same thing. So like no matter where you were, whether you were in Virginia, Florida, California, you saw that same magazine with those same pictures. I went and visited a friend, and that magazine was still in his house, the recruitment. And I said, "Hey, I remember that thing. It was in our recruiting office at our high school." So that's all you had. Today, I think they have robots show up at your house in cadet uniform and try to talk you into going. It's a very much different environment than it was back then.
Another fun fact, Paul, is one of the track coaches. He was a high jumper. Is Ron Purdom? Never forget him. When he learned that I was applying, he came to my practice one time and he handed me his copy of Bugle Notes.
Really?
I was like, So Ron went to the academy, but he left after his first year. And he told me, he goes, "It was just too tough. I wasn't ready for it. I didn't have the discipline." So he left. But that was even the more, when I saw that nugget, that Bugle Notes, I was like, "Oh, I got to go. I definitely got to."
Now, for folks listening who don't know what Bugle Notes is, there's a book of all of the, I don't even know, it's like lore and knowledge and little sayings and song lyrics that you have to memorize as a first year cadet. And it's a test of memorization skills, I guess. I'm not sure. It was just one of these things that they made us do. I guess over the course of this podcast, we're here to explore the meaning of Bugle Notes, because I don't really understand it even all these years later. But we had to memorize things. So getting a copy of Bugle Notes early meant that you were ahead of the curve. I've heard that people, got shoe shining lessons early. I mean, you got a copy of Bugle Notes early. I didn't get anything, right? So some of us just showed up without any of that advanced stuff. So that's good. What did you think of Bugle Notes when you first got it?
I'm terrible at memorizing things. And to me, it was like, oh my gosh, just let me graduate. Let me get my commission. Let me become an officer. And I was like, I got to read all these things. I got to read the New York Times. I got to memorize them. Memorization was horrible for me. Kind of still is too, Jimmy.
Right. And if basically we had to memorize things. They didn't really actually teach us how to memorize things. There's mnemonics. There's all sorts of things that you can learn about these days. But no, they just handed us this book. I still have my Bugle Notes. My dear mother has kept all my stuff. So I went into my Bugle Notes, and I think I had the perfect experience of remembering the academy And my approach to it, because I opened my bugle notes and there was a beer ticket in the very first. That's where I used to use the bugle notes to store my beer tickets. I still have one. If you need one, if you're running short on beer, I've got a beer ticket just in case.
Hey, Paul. So a couple other fun facts, if I may.
Yep.
Talk about shiny shoes. Yeah, I always saw my dad shine his shoes. I also was in a high school RTC, finished up as the high school battalion commander. So shiny shoes all my life. The fourth class system. I challenge anybody to be raised by a Panamanian mother. And I will challenge you to think that that is easier than a fourth class system. So I was raised to go to the academy because I knew how to shine shoes and I was prepared for the rigors of the fourth class system thanks to L Bullard. May she rest in peace.
Clara really sorted you out. I think that's
Yes.
that's great. So you got to West Point, and what was what's your most vivid cadet memory? Pick any year, pick any time. What was one of the more vivid memories you have as a cadet?
It's got to be plebe year.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many others, but the most impressionable to me was plebe year. It was the day Bob Bullard massacred Martha Washington's sheet cake. Remember the Martha Washington sheet cake? Nice big rectangular piece. So I had to go onto the table and it was my turn to cut the dessert. And the minute I finished cutting it, I realized I had butchered it. So the upperclassmen directed me to immediately after lunch, I had to run quickly to the front of the mess hall and go in front of the statue of George Washington and salute George Washington and apologize for massacring his wife's cake. And I had to do it as loud and as proudly as I could to make sure that everybody heard that. Getting out of that, once I did that, then there was a gauntlet of upperclassmen harassing me and shaming me for doing such a dirty deed on Martha Washington's sheet cake.
Those are, yeah, I bet you this day you cut a Martha Washington sheet cake with precision.
I kind of detected a little horror in your face too, because it resonated with you. You're like, oh, I remember those days.
I've massacred many a cake. Although I do know that one of the mysteries of the universe, how to cut an odd number of pieces for a cake and have them be evenly sized. I think that of all the things that I've remembered, that stayed with me the most. So in terms of West Point or the Army, because we're going to talk about the Army as well, talk about a habit you have today. Like, what do you do today that comes directly from that period that you just refuse to shed? Like, what's something that you still do?
Statistically, I'm going to lie with the number, but it's pretty close. About 97% of the time, I get up and I make my bed. First thing I do when I get up is I'll get up and I'll make my bed. And it'll be tight. It'll be straight. Don't want any wrinkles. I don't, what do they call it?
Have you developed a new style of bed making, or is it like the old cornered bed that we used to have to do at the academy? I mean, or you now do like the Robert L. Bullard style?
Yeah, it's stylized. The sheets have the cut corners properly, but the bed lining, the bed cover, the bed spread gets just draped over. It's a little bit easier too.
And never let it be said that a West Point graduate cannot innovate. That's right there is evidence that we can innovate.
That is a fact.
So you went into the field artillery.
Yeah.
From the academy.
King of battle, baby.
Tell the story of the moment you knew you were going to go field artillery. What was going on? What were you thinking? And did you make that decision, or did field artillery pick you? How did that work?
It was kind of a agreed upon decision that I knew I had to make, but it was during the summer of our lives, Camp Buckner, when we were going through the field artillery session of our training. I was really impressed with the cadre. I was really impressed with how we could blow things up from a distance just with our eyes. So that really, really attracted me a lot. So it was yearling year during the beginning of yearling year during Camp Buckner. And I was like, hey, Bob, let's stop kidding yourself. You're not going to be able to apply for the medical program, or you're not going to be able to go Army Aviation. I could have tried, but I knew the place where I wanted to go, and that was the field artillery. Plus, we had a classmate of ours, Tommy Hohenstein. His dad was a retired field artillery guy, so I was impressionable by him and the lore that he always spoke about the field artillery. So yeah, I knew that's where I wanted to go.
Colonel Hohenstein was a great salesman for artillery. I remember.
Yes, he was.
So just for the purpose of clarity, Bobby and I served in the same company together. So we actually were roommates at one point and dear friends. So we have a lot of shared history at the academy, and then afterwards. So yeah, I remember those sessions very, very fondly as we heard all about the field artillery and the glory of it. So you had an idea earlier on. You were heading that direction that field artillery was going to be where you're going to go. Okay, great. And then how did you pick your first assignment? What was your thoughts as you did that?
Yeah, another great mentor of mine, Mark Hertling, who later on, I think he retired as either the TRADOC or FORSCOM commander. He was our DPE, Department of Physical Education instructor for the company. And I remember him saying, what you need to do is you need to make sure you go to a divisional assignment. Now, when I graduated, I knew I was going to get married. I was getting married, and I needed to stay close to St. Petersburg, Florida. So my choices then became divisional assignment was Fort Stewart and Fort Polk, Louisiana. So naturally, again, just like choosing field artillery, I decided, well, the right choice to do, not to disappoint yourself, Bob, is to go with Fort Polk, Louisiana. So went to the 5th Infantry Division. Probably the best decision that I've received from Mark Hertling, and that was to go to a divisional field artillery unit.
He was Captain Hertling at the time, and he rose to great heights, and he even has his own YouTube video, which I think is the mark of fame in this day and age. But
I've got to check that out.
Said, wait a minute,
and he's on TV a lot too.
Yeah, he did very well. So you told me the story about how at the time Captain Hertling, later General Hertling, got you involved in a program of resistance calisthenics. I just remembered this. Talk a little bit about what you were doing there, because I think it's a great story.
Very good. I'm not sure how I got selected, but both myself and another company mate of ours, Michelle Collins, were selected for this pilot program that then Captain Hertling was showing to the academy. Part resisted exercise where you just had a wooden dowel and you were showing how you could get physical fitness by doing different calisthenics and different exercises with a partner, providing resistance while they're trying to perform their exercises too. I think we ran it for an entire semester where we would have to get extra time to be able to do that. But that was a pretty fun time too. Kind of felt like a little guinea pig. Didn't know what it was all about at the time, but it was really fun to be able to showcase some of the techniques that he was trying to impart and trying to get into the academy.
Did they film you doing that? That seems like something that would become like an instructional film of some sort.
I believe there may be some films about that too.
I'm going to have to go back in the archives. I think that would be a tremendous thing to come back to the light of day. I wish right now we could cut to you and Michelle doing resistance exercises back around 1985. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But I don't have that footage. We'll have to.
I'm going to look for it, Paul. I'm going to research.
You know what? We all have stretch goals. That's our next thing we're going to do. Fort Polk. Of course, I attended your wedding. It was legendary. I don't think it's just stuff for a family show like this. We won't talk about the wedding, but you and your bride went down to Fort Polk. Talk about your family and your beautiful daughters, and a little bit about that was the very beginning. But talk about your daughters.
Yeah. So great, 3 beautiful, wonderful women. Brittany, who's 33, she turns 34 this month. She was our first child. Born in Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 1990. She lives abroad on the other side of the world. I just talked to her the other day, in fact, too, and she's doing well, living the life that she wants to live, and I'm really happy about that. She's trying to get me out there to see her, so I got to carve some time to do that. Lauren is my next child, born in, she's 31 years old, born in 92, and she's a nurse. She's born in Fort Polk, Louisiana. She's a nurse up in Fairfax, Virginia. About 2.5 hours away from here. So I get to visit her. In fact, she's going to be coming down here for Father's Day. And then Sophia, my baby, who's 25, and she lives in Portland, Maine. She's born in Fairfax, Virginia. She's born in Fairfax, Virginia, in 98. So great independent women. I love their karma. I love everything about them. And when we get together, it's a wonderful reunion. I miss them. But the separation makes the heart grow fonder too.
What's the craziest thing that happened to you in the Army? Like, what is the craziest thing that happened to you as a lieutenant, for example?
It goes back to there's always something that really, really jars your memory. And the most memorable one is I was in a firing battery, artillery battery, and we were out doing training, and I was the chemical officer. And one of the things we were training for is how to respond to a chemical attack. So I was the lucky one who got to carry a CS grenade, the CS gas. I forget what CS stands for. Anyway, I had to detonate the CS grenade and just throw it into the middle firing battery and just assess and see how everybody was doing the training. Unfortunately, the fuse for the grenade was a short fuse. So the minute I pulled a pin and I release a spoon and I go to throw it, I reach back, I go to throw it, it explodes in my hand. So imagine that explosion, and then all the dust is the fumes are going right into my face. I start gasping for air. I'm walking around, I can't even breathe. And everybody thought it was like a zombie attack to Lieutenant Bullard. Something happened to Lieutenant Bullard. The result,
CS literally inhibits the respirations, and by exploding, all the smoke was coming out. So you couldn't have been closer to what was a pretty awful. It's like this crazy burning sensation. So you got a full face load of it.
full dose. I was like, shoot me now. Please shoot me now. End me with my misery. The result of that is our battalion commander, great guy. Every month they would do at a hail and farewell, they would do something called the Pink Elephant Award. And that's awarded to the individual who did the most ridiculously funny yet harmless error throughout the month. And that's when I won the Pink Elephant Award, even though I got to abuse myself with a direct shot of CS grenade.
And did any nicknames come out there? Did people remember it, or was just kind of what if you got your pink elephant?
No,
that was that. Right.
No, but I do remember seeing many of the soldiers behind their artillery pieces mimicking my zombie move in other field exercises afterwards.
Well, thank goodness we're not Navy flyers, or they'd call you Gaspy or something like that. But anyway, you got away with it, right? You got away with it.
That'd be good. I am a Desert Storm veteran, as are you. Probably one of the best jobs I ever had. That was working as a battalion fire support officer in the 3rd Armored Division. Another little funny anecdote about that is I was supposed to be staying in Hanau, Germany, instead of going with the 3rd Armored Division. I was going to be rear detachment commander. But then my battalion commander said, well, the FSO that was going to go can't make it, so now you're going to be the guy. And I was brand new to the battalion. And he told me, whatever you do, Bob, you better not mess up, because this guy, your battalion commander, armored battalion commander, Tim Lupfer, is a Rhodes Scholar, and he's my West Point classmate. He said, so I'm going to get the first news, whether it's good or bad, and it better be good.
I know what that means.
As it turned out, had a very successful, safe journey through that, and really, really good, rewarding time, because just coming out of the advanced course, learning all the tricks and trades of what a FSO should do. So that's my legacy with respect to the military. That's one of the things I put notch up on my wall, saying, these are one of the iconic moments in my life.
That was your favorite job, was that FSO job?
Absolutely.
Lieutenant Colonel was your rank when you left. Talk a little bit about your career.
Yeah, so I left active duty in 1998, and I knew I still wanted to be in. I knew I still wanted to serve, so I did drag my feet for about 8 months, and I finally signed up into the Army Reserve. At the time, I was a defense contractor, and I was the project manager. I designed and developed something called the Worldwide Individual Augmentation System. Some of our classmates in the military may be familiar with it. For some people, it was a curse. For other people, like leadership, they loved it. It was a good managerial tool. Little side note, it was used right after 9/11, where CENTCOM made a requisition for soldiers to go down to MacDill Air Force Base. And within 36 hours of their requisition, we had soldiers, boots on the ground at the gates of the MacDill. MacDill had to call the Army Operations Center and said, you got to pump the brakes on this system, because we're not ready to hotel these people. We thought it was going to take another typical 10 days like it normally does. So little pat on my back about
how. And what was it? A system that allowed people to basically be found and contacted for orders and things?
It was pretty much a workflow system where from the from the CENTCOM commander. They said what the requirements were, and went to the Army staff, the Joint Staff, and they approved and vetted the request, and then was sourced out to other MACOMs to be able to provide that source.
So being a defense contractor, what you did is you went back, of course, and designed in virtual filing cabinets where things could be lost, and to slow it all down to mimic
that's
real life.
exactly the way it was. Virtually, they had filing cabinets and they were all getting lost. You're absolutely right. So while I was in the YS system, we had a big mobilization conference in Atlanta, Georgia, and a gentleman from the USERPAC headquarters came up to me at break time. They said, "Hey, you seem to know a lot." So I told them, I said, "Hey, graduated from West Point. I was in the military active duty. I'm an ORSA." They said, "How'd you like to come and work for us?" I said, "Well, let me go check with my wife to make sure she'd be okay with it." And they said, "Well, Bob, you would only have to come here for 1 month out of a year. So coming to Hawaii for 1 month out of a year from the DC area, it's not a bad deal." Next break, I come back and said, "Yeah, talk to wife." She said, "That'd be pretty cool." They said, "Good, here's your orders." So I started my stint in Army Reserve as what's called an individual mobilized augmentee. In a nutshell, what that means, if we were to ever mobilize, I would be affiliated with the USERPAC headquarters and perform my role in my mission there with USERPAC. I did that from 1999, from 1999 or 2000 all the way up until I retired from the reserves in 2013. So it wasn't a bad stint that I was able to work in Hawaii and still earn enough time to be able to retire.
So you were based in DC. You go out to Hawaii month
Yeah.
at a time. Maybe a little bit of fishing, like your dad taught you. I don't know. I think that's a pretty good program.
Yeah. I always went in February, and that, enraged my friends too. So.
And then, so you were a 49, which is an operations research specialty. Is that right? Is that right?
That's
how did
correct.
that play into these different things you did in the reserve? And
First of all, I love numbers. Sometimes numbers don't love me. You remember the cadet account and how Judd Bass, rest his peace, wrote in our yearbook how Bob knew how to stretch a cadet account. Well, the ORSA in me was able to do that. I love playing with numbers. I took the ORSAMAC course at Fort Lee, Virginia, and then I became a joint C4I testing person on the staff that lasted briefly. I ended up residing in Human Resources Command, Alexandria, Virginia, where I did more policy plans analysts for the G1. Most of my time as an ORSA in the military was working for the G1. But I was still able to apply all the ORSA skills. Got my master's from George Mason University while I was working at the Pentagon, doing a similar work as a policy analyst. And still to this day, I do that work. That's what I kind of do as an enterprise architect today. So
right, they give you a blank sheet of paper and say,
pretty
architect an enterprise, and off you go. I love it.
exactly.
That's
exactly right.
excellent. And then moved back to Virginia. So I did a stint in Denver where we ran into each other. Spent
Yes.
some time together there, and then off to Virginia. 20 years ago, picture back. So you got to do the math in your own head of your current age, and then you go back 20 years. But we're going to say it's somewhere in the late 30s, early 40s. What advice would you give a 20 years younger Bobby Bullard? And this is would be useful for the class of 2006, I guess, West Point class of 2006. 20 years younger Bobby Bullard. What advice would you give that young man?
There's a lot of anecdotes about that, Paul. I would have to say always make sure you could look in the mirror every morning and like who you are. If you can't like who you are, then adjust who you are and don't be that person. Always treat people with regard and with respect. Have a good time. Enjoy what you're doing. And don't get caught up in the minutiae. We could easily I've done all those things. So that's what I'm saying. Don't do it. But you say 20 years ago, we were 40. And now that I'm reflecting, now I'm talking about that, given it, 20 years has been a flash. It's gone by really, really fast. Yeah. And I still feel like I'm 40. I may not look like I'm 40, but I still have that youthful fervor within me to be able to continue to do those things. So, and don't forget to make your bed every morning.
Right. I think that would be the key piece of advice. That the 20 years on, Bobby would say, look at how I've innovated this wonderful bed making technique. We always think about if we had the opportunity to go back in time and give ourselves advice. So maybe folks coming out of the Army now in their 40s can hear voices from the future. Got it. Bobby, thanks so much for being on the podcast. We've kicked off the Courage Never Quits podcast, the podcast that is for 1986 graduates. Anybody who is willing to be interviewed and who has graduated from the class of 86 is a guest on the Courage Never Quits podcast. Today was Robert Bullard, 42995, column number. Excellent interview. Thanks so much, Bobby.
Paul, thanks. Beat Navy, everybody. Courage never quits.
Beat Navy. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 86 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. We'll see you in the next episode.